Hey, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of the SaaS Flow Show. I am your host, Trent Deersmith, and I'm here to help you discover what is working for growing SaaS businesses by shining a light on the tools, the tactics, and the strategies that are in use by today's leading SaaS founders. Today, in part one of a three-part series, my guest is Greg Mercer, founder of Junglescout, the leading software for Amazon sellers. Greg is a leader in the Amazon selling community who originally built Junglescout as a Chrome extension to automate the process of finding products to sell on Amazon while he was traveling the world. Today, Greg leads a team of 125 global employees who have built Junglescout into a robust suite of SaaS solutions. Greg, thank you so much for making some time. Welcome to the show.
Trent, thank you very much for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you.
Indeed. So let's, without further ado, let's start with part one. We're going to talk on this part of our first part of our three-part mini-series. We're going to talk about your company overview and some key stats that I think other SaaS founders would be interested in. So real quick, in a nutshell, what does your company do?
Junglescout is a all-in-one software tool for Amazon sellers. Started out as a product research tool to help Amazon sellers find new opportunities or new products they wanted to sell on Amazon. Since then, it's transitioned into a tool for Amazon sellers to help them not only find products, but also manage their business and optimize their Amazon listings.
And I've used it, and it's a very comprehensive tool, and it does a lot of stuff, I will say that. Your ideal customer, so there's lots of Amazon sellers, all the way from little one-person shop in a spare room in their house, all the way up to companies that employ hundreds of people doing over $100 million a year in sales. Your target customer is?
The entrepreneur to the small business.
Okay. What does your pricing model look like?
Yeah, our pricing model starts at around $40 a month. And it goes up to typically the $100 range. However, there's a few custom plans for the larger customers.
Okay, and your average customer is paying you how much per month?
Roughly $50.
$50. And when did you launch?
In February of 2015. So almost 5 years ago now.
Man, but still, that's a hell of an accomplishment. So how many customers do you have now, and how many are paid? Do you have like a freemium model? So if there's customers, break them out between paid and free.
Yeah, so we have, we've gone through a number of different pricing options through the life of Junglescout. When I was just born, it was just a Chrome extension. There was like this one-time fee. So, and then after that, it went to an annual fee, and now you can either purchase that monthly or annually. And there's about 200,000 customers using that product that are either currently paying or have been grandfathered in this like a lifetime type license.
Okay.
In addition, there's about another 50,000 or so who have purchased our web application, which has more traditional SaaS pricing.
Okay. And your monthly revenue, what range is that in right now?
Yeah, so we're in the low tens of millions in ARR. So
okay.
You can divide that by 12 to get monthly.
Okay. Year-over-year growth rate?
Last year to this year at, we'll call it around 40% growth.
And how's that trend been over the last couple of years? Obviously, as things get bigger, they get harder to continue to grow at a really high growth rate.
Yeah, I'd say the first 2 years were kind of like a rocket ship. And then, like you said, as the business matures, growth gets harder. So as a percent of year-over-year growth, that has decreased each year.
Yep, pretty understandable. And you're up to about 125 employees now? Is that correct?
Yep.
So how many added in the last year versus how many added in the year before?
So let's see, January of 18, we only had about 30 people. By the end of 2018, we had about 100 people. So that was a really big growth year as far as headcount, more than tripled. And then we definitely felt the growing pains associated with that. And this year, 2019, we're 3/4 of the way done with the year when we're recording this. And, it's only gone from 100 to about 125. So the headcount growth this year has been much slower And really the first like quarter of this year, we pretty much put a freeze on the hiring and said, let's kind of grow into all this new headcount. As you can imagine, there was a lot of just strain associated with that for the organization, and making sure everyone knew what they were working on and doing, and just training all these new employees.
So we're going to talk about that more in part 3 of our interview. And we'll use whatever time we have left in part 1 to dig into that a little bit more. But before we get into that, I want to talk about an activity which would have been presumably the precursor to that, and that's raising capital, because it's really hard to hire that fast unless you've probably raised some capital, or your company is throwing off an immense amount of cash. So in your case, was it required for you to go out and do a raise, or did you do a raise, or have you literally been able to scale that quickly just on cash flow?
Yeah, so believe it or not, the company is completely bootstrapped as a single founder, and we've been able to grow just off cash flow. Now, in the early days, I still have an Amazon business, a physical products business that was funding the company in the early days. But really for the past few years, we've been able to grow and scale just off the cash flow of Junglescout.
Wow. Now, at the size that you're at, do you think you're going to raise money at any point, or do you just not see a need to do so?
I'm definitely open to it. We've been very fortunate in the fact that we've been able to grow just off cash flow to date. And I don't foresee us needing to raise capital in the near future, let's say like the next half a year or a year. But depending on kind of what we decide to do as far as some of like the growth plans and opportunities, where we want to invest, what new potential business opportunities we want to take on, I don't have all the answers to all those right now by any means. So just kind of depending on that, that's when we'll just do some more thinking about whether or not it makes sense to raise capital or not. So nothing against it. We've just been fortunate enough to be able to grow based off of the revenue generated from our customers.
And how do you decide, when you look at the profits in a given quarter or year, how do you decide how much is going to be taken out of the business or put into the emergency fund versus, reinvested in the business? Or do you literally just take all the profit all the time and just completely reinvest?
I think in the earlier days, I was pretty hesitant to reinvest heavily or run the business at smaller margins. I think that was kind of like maybe more of like a typical, just like young entrepreneur mindset. Also, like for me, like bootstrapping this, quit my job, I was an entrepreneur just making money off my businesses. And like for the first few years, I always just had this terrible fright that I was gonna have to go back and get a real job at some point. And that was like the scariest thing I'd ever heard of in my entire life, having to go back and get a real job. So in the earlier days, I was definitely much more conservative as far as like, hey, I have to make sure there's enough money for me to survive, so I don't have to go back and get a real job. And then I'd say there's a certain point where I think I got over that hump. I was like, okay, I'm probably not going to have to go back and get a real job anymore. And the not only that, but the business has able to generate a little bit of a cushion in the bank account as well. And kind of those two things combined, that's when I started to feel like a little bit more comfortable with running the business, let's say closer to at a break even to maximize growth, as opposed to maximizing for this balance of profitability and growth.
How many months worth of overhead do you like to keep in the bank? As we'll call it, emergency fund, for lack of a better expression.
Yeah, I would say, so if we generated $0 revenue starting today, how long could we operate the business? And, I'd say I feel pretty comfortable at let's say 4 to 6 months. If, revenue got cut off today, but we want to run the same expenses for 4 to 6 months, I think I feel pretty comfortable with that, because realistically, you're never going to cut off your revenue down to $0 today, right?
No.
So
no.
I think that's a pretty healthy amount. And yeah, I think that's what we would have we might even have more than that in the bank right now, but I would feel plenty comfortable with, even 3 or 4 months.
And I would imagine at this size of revenue and profitability that, you've got operating lines of capital available to you and all sorts of other forms of financing that wouldn't require you to go out and raise money from investors.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that I became more aware of as we grew is, like going out and raising money would be pretty easy for me at this point. Getting capital in other means, using other structures would be, fairly easy or like very doable. So that's why I like no longer quite have like that scarcity mindset maybe that I once did.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes left in this first segment. And I mentioned, so we've got about 4.5 minutes left. The one thing before we get into our 5 quick facts, the one thing I want to dive a little bit deeper into that we're going to cover in more detail in part 3 of the series is the hiring. If you had to pick the single greatest challenge or surprise, either or, of adding that many people to the payroll and to your team in a 12-month period of time that you maybe didn't, like I say, you didn't predict going in, what would that be?
The single biggest surprise of growing a headcount by that?
Yeah, because you'd mentioned, there were some challenges as comes as no surprise, but I'm sure you went into that, having talked to people and developed a plan and how we're going to scale and how we're going to onboard them. I'm sure you gave it thought in advance, but then stuff always happens.
Right. I'd say like it was probably a surprise, but also the biggest just learning from that experience was like I value previous people management and management experience much more now than like before I went through that kind of like growth phase. So we promoted a lot of like all-star individual contributors into people managers. And now I feel like I can almost like write a book on it, but it was like we're seeing the same issues and problems over and over and over with first-time people managers. And part of that's of course because like poor like mentorship and teachings inside of our company. But I think that was like one of the biggest surprises to me of like the difference of a first-time people manager that probably doesn't have that good a mentorship inside of the company of how to become a great people manager compared to like well experienced seasoned managers and executives and how much better they are at managing people.
Yep. So I made a note of that. We're going to dive into that a little deeper in part 3. Before we close out for today, let's get into the 5 quick facts. What is either the current business book that you're reading or your favorite business book?
I just got done with Radical Candor by, I think it's Kim Scott. It's a book about giving honest feedback and how ultimately that's like the best thing you can do is be like just more candor in your feedback and that you give to the team members on your team. And yeah, it's a really good book. If you haven't read it and you'd like to improve just like your management and leadership abilities, Radical Candor is great.
Have you ever read a book called Vivid Vision or one called The Road Less Stupid?
I've not read either of those.
I want to
recommend them.
I recommend them. Yes. Yeah. I read them both earlier this year and
Okay.
We don't have time to dive into it, but go read the Amazon reviews and make your own decision. Favorite online tool for growing your business, and you can't say Junglescout.
I think these types of questions everyone tends to answer like Zoom and Slack, which I of course love and use hours and hours every day.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe one that wouldn't get as mentioned as much is the one that I use called Snagit, but there's a handful that do something similar. But essentially you just take a little screenshot on your screen and you can do a little arrow or a text blurb or whatever else. And that's just a really effective way for like communicating, especially if someone's not in the office next to you, about like what you're looking for, what you'd like them to do. So I find myself using that a lot.
Yeah, I use Sketch, same thing. Like
same thing.
How many times a day? 10,
right.
20, 30? Because it's communicating with remote people. It's wonderful. Hours per week. How many hours a week you putting in at the office?
I work about 50 hours a week.
And that, we CEOs say we work 50 hours a week, but that's when you're there. There's always this going on all the time.
Yeah. A lot of that going on in my mind. I am more disciplined now about like when I'm at home. about spending, like better quality time with my wife instead of me sitting with the laptop on my lap with my wife next to me and calling that quality time. Pretty good about disconnecting from the hardware when I get home, but it's still always going on in the mind. I can't stop that.
Yeah. So that was actually my next question, family situations. Do you have a wife? Do you have kids yet?
No kids.
No
Just
kids?
wife.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then finally, what do you, with hindsight to your benefit, what do you wish that your younger self knew?
I wish I took the plunge into entrepreneurship much younger. I think my whole life I've just had this entrepreneurial spirit, and I wish I just didn't feel like societal and cultural pressures to like get a typical corporate job, even though I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Okay. So folks, that wraps up part 1 of my interview with Greg. Make sure you tune in. It's probably going to be tomorrow or maybe 2 days later, something like that. You're going to see part 2 show up in iTunes. So make sure you come back and check it out. Okay. That's so my editor can see the spike. Welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Greg Mercer, founder of Junglescout. In case you missed it, in part 1, Greg and I talked about his company, how he got it off the ground, how it's been growing, some of the challenges to do with that growth, and a number of other things. Today, we're going to talk more specifically about growth strategies. How are you making it grow? What are the things that are working for you? So, Greg, are you ready to dive into that?
Let's do it.
All right. Tell me about your customer acquisition, geez, I can't talk today, systems. And now obviously that might be a really long answer. Keep in mind, we have only 15 minutes for this segment. And so if you have multiple systems, let's talk about the one that maybe is the most successful.
Yeah. So I think we have a pretty well balanced, just customer acquisition channel. What I mean by that is we have quite a few different channels that work effectively for us. The nice thing about that is you're not, just relying on Google or just relying on this or that or the other thing. If I were to say, or, let's dive a little bit deeper into one of them that I feel like is effective for us. And I think, like for us, if I were to like to kind of like sum it up about like my favorite one or the one that's felt like has worked the best is doing very, very high quality content series. So an example of this is we did a content series called the $1 Million Case Study. The $1 Million Case Study was where we publicly launch an Amazon product, we build this business, we grow it to $1 million in revenue. This is done through a series of live webinars and then ultimately recorded. You could see our product, you got to see behind the scenes, and it was quite well done. It's totally for free. And yeah, it was like you could get really everything you needed to start and grow an Amazon business from it. And
was Jungle Sticks an example of that?
Jungle Sticks was the first series, and we ended up doing 4 series. So like a different product each series.
Okay.
But yeah, like, you've heard of Jungle Sticks, and quite a few other people have heard of those or other different products that we've launched. And it's really because, we just produced like a high quality piece of content that was very educational. And I guess it was like so good that people were even like just recommending it to their friends. Like, you should check this out if you want to learn how to sell, that type of thing.
And how far out does the content come after the product launch? Because I'm right away wondering, how many people are copying you, trying to piggyback on the idea, polluting the marketplace and increasing competition.
We were doing it live, so real time. And as you can imagine, we would have tons of copycats. And of course, that would affect our margins. But that was kind of just one of the things that we just decided we wanted to deal with. And yeah, I think all the products are still successful in their own right. I'd say for the first like 3 to 6 months, the margins were really tight because of all that increased competition of all the people also copying us in real time. But yeah, all things considered, I think it was still a great win for us.
So best marketing activity, content. What would be the second best marketing activity?
The second best would probably be if I were to group together podcasts and webinars and guest appearances on whatever medium you choose on other partners. And again, the goal of these is always like 99.99% just provide pure value and ask for like nothing in return. So,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm not going on there to like sell Junglescout, but instead
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like trying to teach you everything I know. And of course, there's going to be some mentions of Junglescout because that's where I work. That's what,
Mm-hmm.
what it does. And as a result, people are just naturally curious and they check it out and they see if they're interested in it.
So those approaches have resulted in a customer acquisition cost of?
It's about, so our total blended customer acquisition costs for all of our marketing spend, including salaries of our whole marketing team,
Mm-hmm.
equals about 2x of our average first month revenue from a customer. So it takes about 2 months to earn back the amount of money that it costs to acquire the customer.
So
Total
about
blended.
so about $100, because I think
Yep.
you said earlier it's about $50 per.
Yeah.
Okay. So you already answered my next question in advance. Thank you for that. Average lifetime value of a customer, how long do they hang around for?
On, our business is quite interesting because there's different groups. Like one of the groups are these aspiring
Mm-hmm.
Amazon sellers or aspiring entrepreneurs. And this group is extremely churny, right? Like they
Yep.
typically stick around for like 1 or 2 months. And then if you look at like our cohort graph or a cohort chart, it's like people either turn out at like month 1 or 2, or they stay for like 1, 2, 3 years. So total blended there, the average time a customer sticks around is like close to 6 months.
So knowing that the churn is so high for the aspiring entrepreneurs, and that's just the very nature of the business. A lot of folks have dreams, but then they don't necessarily have the fortitude or the stick-with-itness or whatever to make a success of it. Does your team spend much time trying to figure out how to go from 1 month to 3 months, or do you just accept that that's a fact of the business for that particular customer segment and work on getting the folks who are going to be successful to stick with your tool for as long as possible?
We still do attempt to get those 1 month people to 2 or 3 or 4 months because they still do make up a significant portion of our new signups. And the way we do that is just like everything we can think of or do to try to help them be successful on Amazon. So part of that is, like mindset and sticking with it, even though there's going to be bumps in the road and challenges because you are starting a business. The other part of it is tactics. The other part of it is like helping them find that opportunity, then helping them find a supplier for it. So we do like everything we can think of essentially to help these people be successful with starting their business. But we've seen some success there, but it's a pretty difficult challenge. Like um, the truth of all of it is that starting a business is challenging. Like
Yeah.
it's going to be tough. There's going to be some late nights and there's going to be some hard work and you're going to have to invest some money. And some people just don't ultimately quite have what it takes no matter what we do to try to help them.
Yeah. Have you thought of doing things like, okay, if your current stick rate in that segment is 2 months, maybe we come out with a pricing plan where they can buy 6 months for 4 months or something like that to try and increase the average ticket so that you're able to spend more on marketing?
Yes, we are currently doing quite a bit of testing with how we package these different plans and the pricing associated with them. The And I think we can do a lot better with it. I'm confident that we will find something that works a lot better, but the it's challenging, I think, from a marketing standpoint and a pricing and merchandising standpoint to segment those two different audiences, like the
Mm-hmm.
people who want to become an Amazon seller versus like the small business that has like, 1, 2, 3, 4 people and they, already got started, but they're still quite a small business. It's like, it's kind of difficult to segment those groups and like kind of show them different packages or different pricing. So that's something that we're working on. It's not a challenge we can't overcome, but I'd say it is, it's kind of a hard problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't doubt it. Okay. What about, so for the other segment, average churn per month? Do you know what that number is?
The segment of, let's call it more like mature
Yeah.
sellers,
Yeah.
it's roughly 5 or 6% per month.
Okay. And are there ways, I'm sure your team is always working on ways to get that number down. In the last 6 months, have there been any experiments that you have run that have been quite reasonably successful at getting that number down? Or I guess another way is, what's been the best experiment to get that number down?
I think like the thing that we've done to impact it the most is just dive into like the analytics. And a lot of people will probably just know these kind of like by gut and say like, what are those key moments in your customer's journey that it's kind of like a little bit of like an aha moment, or like the moment they're like, oh, that's so awesome, or something like that, that kind of gets them to like fall in love with it in like the first month or two, or something along those lines. Or like or like how do those people behave that end up sticking around for a while? So like an example of Junglescout now is the customers who, now we offer analytics for your Amazon business, and we just released keyword rank tracking and different things like that. So like the customers who enter their expenses, it takes a little while, right? It takes like, if you have 20 products, you might have to spend 30 minutes entering all your expenses. Like the customers who do enter their expenses stay around much longer, because then all of a sudden like the profit analytics and the profit dashboard, like it works. Like, we automatically download Amazon sales, but if you don't enter your costs, then you don't actually know your profit. So there's just some little things like that it's like, if you perform this action, it's much more likely for you to stick around. And then what can we do to help those, or like increase the amount of customers that perform those actions? Some of it's as easy as like send them a follow-up email every week that they still haven't entered their expenses. Some other things that we're testing this quarter, but we haven't done yet, is giving them something of value. So like sending them a Junglescout t-shirt if they enter their expenses, or giving them a coupon, or like doing different things like this to really incentivize them to perform these different actions that we know lead to longer retention.
So in terms of customer success systems, which is obviously pretty important during the onboarding phase, aside from what you've just described, is there anything else that you've had in use for a while and you consider it to be a foundation or a cornerstone of your customer success?
Yeah, I don't think I have any magic bullets here, things that you wouldn't typically hear. They get an onboarding email series when they've signed up. And there's different routes you can go down with that, right? If you perform this action but not that, you get a different email. So it's a little bit more customized to what's most important to you. There's little in-app messaging that tells you about or asks you to do something, or tells you how to use something. You have like little videos in there in app that are explainers. So, there's a few little things like that, but it's it's the type of just kind of like onboarding, customer success, product education that you see from most companies.
So earlier, you and I talked about Nathan. I don't know if you've seen this, but he's got a Slack group, which he's made really clever. Some of the stuff that he's done with different channels and then bots to force people to get interacting with one another to build community. Have you guys, with respect to building, because I know in my world, when you build community, people get together and they become each other's accountability partner. And I think, I don't have any hard data in my world to support this because I haven't done those studies, but my feeling is that helps people to stick around more and work harder because they have these relationships. So if you haven't checked out Nathan's Slack community, I would encourage you or someone on your team to just get in it and see kind of what he's doing, and because I'm sure you could reverse engineer it. It's quite clever.
Cool. Yeah, I'll have to check that out. We've experimented with like a private Facebook community. If you join Junglescout, it is pretty active, and there's like 50,000 people in there, and they're pretty good about helping each other out. But it still feels like to me on Facebook that the perceived value of that is extremely low, that like Facebook should be free. Whereas I do agree that it seems like an in-app community or a Slack community or something like that, it feels like the perceived value would be a little bit higher. You feel like you have to kind of like stick around, continue to use the tool in order to get it. So I would like to do some more around that.
Yeah, he's actually taking his community, which has been free, and it's going to become a premium community for, I think, $500 a year. And so I've been using it a lot in the last while to try and determine, hey, should I pay the $500 and remain a part of this community once the paywall goes up? But I do particularly like how it's got a Monday morning coffee thing, and the little bot tells me, hey, you're matched up with so-and-so this week. So I might not have otherwise reached out to so-and-so to talk shop, but now I'm doing it because the bot's telling me to do it. And I think that's probably the feature that I like the most about it.
Cool. I like that.
What role have standard operating procedures or documented business systems played in helping you to scale your business over the last year or two?
Yeah, good question. I would say that like SOPs and creating good systems to help you scale, I'd say it's like probably a weak point of mine. Like I'm not very organized, like a little bit more like creative, and I have been able to notice a transition in the business from hiring managers and executives that are like better operators and more organized and like understand how to scale their team from 20 people to 100 people. So I'd say like they would be much more active in using like these organized processes or SOPs to help kind of like grow the department. And it definitely helps. It makes sense. I don't think anyone can argue that.
So it's not necessarily a part of the company culture that, hey, no matter what we do, we have a documented process for it.
No, it's not. It's more of a just kind of like scrappy, make it happen. It's not like a really well organized and like SOP type company culture.
Yep. Okay. Last question for this segment. What is one actionable item that a listener, and we'll define listener as another SaaS founder or senior leadership at a SaaS company, could put into action tomorrow to achieve more growth? I know that's rather a broad question.
Right. I'm trying to think of some of the, some of like the biggest easy needle mover, like it's easy to say things like, oh, like improve the product, whatever else, but this takes a lot of developers and a lot of time.
Yeah.
Easy things that I feel like not enough people do, or like one, for the past few months, we've been always running a split test on our pricing page. And this isn't necessarily even different prices, but even the way that we package it and merchandise it, or add a plan or remove a plan. And some of those have a really big impact, and it's not that difficult of a thing to do. Sign up for one of the A/B testing platforms, build a new page that you have a hypothesis that's going to work better, and test it. And some of them are like kind of a wash, or some of them lose, and other ones it's like, wow, this has made a huge difference.
Okay. So folks, that wraps up part 2 of my 3-part series with Greg Mercer, founder of Junglescout. Please make sure that you keep an eye on your inbox or your iTunes app on your phone for part 3, which will be out within a day or 2 of this recording. Welcome back to part 3, the final segment of my interview with Greg Mercer, founder of Junglescout. Greg, thank you so much for doing the first 2 segments of the interview. Today, we're going to be talking more in depth about leadership and people. So in episode number 1, you disclosed that you had 125 employees. You added heavily to that, I think you said last year in 2018, and not so heavily in 19, correct?
Correct.
So can you break that down? First of all, let's break it down into the 2 biggest silos in a software company, engineering versus sales and marketing. What are the percentages in each of those silos?
I think there are 25 people in our marketing department. And for engineering, I like to also group in like the product managers and the UX designers. We kind of call it like R&D. And there's about 55 or 60 people in the R&D department.
And I would assume customer support, you're not including in that category.
Correct. Not including customer support.
So how many for customer support?
I think a little bit less than 20.
20. Okay. So Tell me, first of all, let's dive into how you attract these folks. So back in 2018, when you were on a huge binge to add headcount, I know in my own business, anytime I'm trying to fill an opening, it's really hard to find, it's not hard to get applications, but it's really hard to find the right people to make the decision on. So can you share with us some of the best practices that have been working well for you in that regard, from, you know, posting to interviewing to actually hiring?
Yeah, and actually looking back, this is probably one of the biggest, or this has made a huge impact on our company, is that we used to post job offers and just wait for applications to come in. And then we hired a recruiter. And then, like if we look forward to today, I don't know if we post job applications or not, but all of our applicants only come in from outbound recruiting. So like we have two recruiters, like their full-time job is just to source candidates for whatever open roles that we have. And this is made, so I'd say like probably 90 or 95% of people that we hire now we're not looking for jobs. Okay. It's like they weren't out like searching for a new job. They already had a job that they liked and they were probably doing a good job at it.
Mm-hmm.
And we proactively reached out to them and like we recruited them. So I think that made a big difference for a couple of reasons. One is like the best people already have jobs and they're probably happy with those jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they're probably doing a really good job at that company. So it's less likely that type of person is constantly job searching. Like, of course, there's some good people job searching, but you get the idea. And the other reason I'm a huge fan of this, and I think it was really beneficial, is it used to be the job of the hiring manager to essentially sort through the applications and contact them to interview them and do the interviews, right? And we all know that's very
time consuming.
Totally. Very time consuming, right? So I think what would happen is, this is before we had HR or anything. So they were in charge of like all these different types, just interviewing and sorting through applications, everything else. And as a result, I think it was more likely that they would accept a mediocre candidate because they're like, I want to go interview 10 more people like before I fill this role, because that's a lot of time, a lot of work. So instead now they just have they have an endless pipeline, and we'll just put good candidates in front of them as long as they're willing to interview, which hopefully is a long time. But we're doing outbound recruiting, so we're finding good people. There's a screening call with our recruiters, which is pretty in depth. They weed out most people. So as a result, they're getting they have a limitless pipeline of high quality candidates. And as a result, it's like, well, I kind of, that person's pretty good, but yeah, who cares? Like I can get 10 more good interviews next week. So I'm not going to take this mediocre person on my team. I'll just get one of these good ones next week.
Are these recruiters employees, or are they companies, the recruiting companies that you're paying a commission to?
They are internal. At one point, we had one of our recruiters leave, so we got a contract. But they do all the recruiters just do outbound or just reach out on LinkedIn, right? So it's it's pretty easy to we haven't found that hiring these recruitment firms give any added benefit, and they're actually quite expensive because they usually take like the first salary, right? So it's like, man, after 2 or 3 people, we could just pay for or we could just have an internal, really high quality recruiter. So that's what we've done ever since.
And so when they're looking on LinkedIn for folks, what are 1 or 2 of the tactics that they're using to, in the whole huge world of LinkedIn where there are, an endless number of people, how do they go about finding folks that would be good prospects to come and join your team?
Honestly, I don't really know.
Okay.
But they do a good job at it. I don't know for sure how they search or filter through them. I think if you sign up for a LinkedIn recruiter plan, I think you have some added filters or something that you can use, but I'd be lying to you if I told you I really knew, Trent.
Okay. So let's shift then and talk a little bit about retention. It's no good to recruit and be really good at recruiting if you can't keep them on board. And I was listening to a really funny episode of another podcast the other day, And this particular company, I think it was Borland, which was a big software company back in the day. They had the gym and they had a hot tub and they had the cafeteria and all these perks for employees. And one manager walks by one day and there's 2 employees on company time sitting in the hot tub complaining about working at that company.
Mm.
And you get the irony in that situation is, they're in the hot tub on company time, having probably just eaten a meal that was made in the company, and they're complaining about working there, which is to say that perks aren't everything.
Right.
So what are some of the things that you have discovered that work exceedingly well to keep folks happy and to keep them loyal?
Yeah. My opinion on this has changed like a lot over the years. So, like here at Junglescout, I'd say we probably pay, like in the top 25 percentile of, the salary ranges, and we have 401k and you get equity and, snacks and a cool office, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But there's really, I now strongly believe that most of that stuff really doesn't matter at all. Actually, I think it helps a little bit with the recruiting, but actually I don't think it really helps at all with the employee retention. I don't think anyone's ever really stuck around. So it's like, oh, they whatever have this. By far the number one thing that like makes team members happy or like fulfilled with their job is, I think, their manager. Okay. So like, I think that's by far the most important one, is like their relationship with their manager and if they're enjoying their work. And most high achievers and like the highest quality employee, they really want to be challenged and like given new challenges and new problems. So they're constantly learning, and they want like a good mentor also to help them learn. That mentor is typically their manager, maybe some other people inside the company as well. So I now firmly believe that that's the most important thing for employee retention. Like all this other crap that we do and spend money on probably doesn't make hardly any difference. And we also do we do twice a year company retreats, and you do sometimes hear like that. And we go to cool places. Like we're going to Costa Rica in January, and we've been to all these cool cities all around the world. You do from time to time hear people talk about that. Like they do get pretty excited about that. I'd say more so than snacks or 401k or equity or whatever else. But I think it's by far just their day-to-day satisfaction, which is primarily driven by their manager and the work that they're doing.
Well, that's not surprising at all, because a 401k and equity is delayed gratification.
Totally.
A snack is incidental, but enjoying what I'm doing each day and enjoying who I'm talking to each day, I'm reminded of how much I like it or how much I don't every day.
So I'd say, if you're listening to this right now, I'd say the main thing that you should focus on for increased employee retention is having really good managers. It's like now we invest quite a bit in manager training, and we hire, or, we're extra careful about the managers that we're hiring and how good of mentors and coaches they are, and the problems and the challenges that we're giving to people. And because, I think that's ultimately what makes the difference.
So that was going to be my next question. So talking about training, because you said earlier on that you had found that finding people who already had some level of management experience was a valuable change from what you were doing before. Mm-hmm. And then you're continuing to invest more money in educating and training those folks. What types of training? Are there certain things or programs that you found, hey, like this is working really well for us? And if so, what are those programs?
So I'd say it's like a combination of things. One is, depending on the department, they'll send them to different conferences, or, we have recommended reading material or things like that. But I think probably the 2 areas that I feel like help the most is, one, just like an internal manager training that we've developed. And that's actually probably the biggest one. The second one I was going to say was, we do hire coaches for a lot of our managers. Right now we're using this service called BetterUp, which is like kind of like coaching at scale. So it's more affordable. I think it's like maybe $5,000 per person per year, whereas a lot of coaches would be like quite a bit more than that. So it's like a little bit more affordable. But probably our internal training is actually what has the biggest help. It'd either be the mentorship from their manager or our internal training where we help train new employee or like new managers. So what that consists like now we kind of have these things that are it's like, oh man, we see this every time we promote someone into a first time manager. Like the most common one is that they always just want to be their friend instead of being like pretty critical and hard on them. And the new manager always thinks that, oh, by being really nice all the time and their friend, this is what will make them like me the most, whatever. But in reality, again, like the high performers, they want critical feedback and they want you to be pretty hard on them and they want you to push them because that's how they learn and develop and grow inside of their careers. So like that's by far the biggest one. And then there's a lot of just other smaller ones about just like setting clear expectations. And a lot of it's just around kind of like, it's really would just be around kind of communication, expectation setting. Yeah, a lot of it really in those areas.
So with respect to the internal manager training, were there any programs, people, conferences, or whatever, which influenced the material that your team has developed?
I think there was probably a lot that influenced it. It was developed by our director of people operations here at Junglescout. And yeah, I think it took kind of inspiration from a lot of different leadership courses, books, whatever else, and probably just combine that into like common themes we maybe believe in the most, or just kind of like how it works here at Junglescout. So like an easy example of that is like here at Junglescout, all managers have to have a we recommend you have a one-on-one weekly, but at the bare minimum, every other week with all your direct reports. And like, so there's just like little things like that some of the listeners for the show is like, oh, of course you do that as a manager. But we saw fairly often before developing some of the little things like that, they just kind of weren't having one-on-ones or not talking very much or just things like that.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. So I want to make good on the promise that we made in the first part of this 3-part series. And you talked about hiring first-time managers versus hiring more experienced folks. And I want to try and figure out how to do this in a way to make it interesting and helpful to the audience. So aside from the fact that just worked better, is there any other color you can add to that topic for folks who are listening to make them think more about it or make them potentially alter their approach?
Yeah. So I definitely have like this entrepreneurial spirit, very like entrepreneurial minded. I got to Jungle Scout from, I grew Jungle Scout quite a bit, like in the first couple of years without any, these are real like experienced executives. Like we were mostly hiring these like scrappy, get it done type attitudes. They maybe didn't have like any experience really, but they could just like figure out how to make stuff happen. It was a lot of like those types of people in like the first 10 people. And I think that was actually quite important. But one of the things that I realized is, like the saying, like what got you here won't get you there. That was very, very true for us. And I saw that change by hiring more like seasoned executives and more experienced people. And so, now I have a full executive team that reports to me. And when I say like, an executive, they're either a C-level or VP level. These people typically have 20 years industry experience. I think they all have Ivy League MBAs. They've worked at a bunch of successful startups that have gone from, with whatever billion-dollar valuations or exits. And so they've definitely just like been around the block. And at first, I think I was quite hesitant. Like, no, we don't need people like that, or like we don't need these really experienced people. Like, we've made this work without them, type of thing. And then once we got to a certain size, it was probably like 20 or 30 people. It's like, wow, there's so much broken stuff in here, and it's a mess. And then once I started hiring these more seasoned executives, that's when I was like, oh wow, like you guys are really good at running, like at operating companies or running departments and growing. And so I would say, if you're listening to this and you do have like 5 or 10 people on your team, and that resonates with you, that you don't really have very many well-experienced people, and you don't really feel like you need it because there's something different about your company, I would encourage you to kind of think twice about it and think like, okay, like at what point does it make sense to hire a little bit more experience. And as a result, like they're also really expensive, right? So like you have to shell out a lot of cash for this level of experience. But for us, I think we found it's definitely worth it.
So let's say somebody out there is listening and they're right at that inflection point. Maybe it's 10 or 12 people, somewhere in there. What's the first position they should hire that level of talent for? Is it a COO, a director of ops? Is it marketing?
Yeah. So one of our first was it was an operations role. They were originally hired at a director level. And I think that actually makes sense for that size, but like, I'd be looking for people who have been a director at like, like legit good sized companies before. I think that's a good experience level for that size of company.
Mm-hmm.
Once you start getting into 30, 40, 50 people, that's when I think it really starts to make sense to start hiring like the VP level or C level type people. So, but yeah, my first one was like an ops role. After that, I would probably encourage you to think about what you're best at and what you would like, or like what you would like help at. So for me, most of the marketing stuff came quite a bit more naturally than say formal product experience or, some of the customer support stuff. Like I just found myself naturally gravitating towards marketing. So that was one of the last executives that I hired. I ran that department for quite a while.
Okay. So the company is Junglescout. My guest has been Greg Mercer. The success story has been phenomenal, going as a bootstrapped company from no employees to 125 in just a few short years. Greg, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Trent, I've enjoyed it. Thank you.